3, 2, 1.
Voice with Julia, change your voice, change your life.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Voice with Julia's Technique Talks, where we demystify conversations surrounding vocal technique with behind-the-scenes access to great singers of today. I'm your host, Julia Radosh, and with me here is Alexandra Lucian and Annie Rosen. Welcome, ladies.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here. Alexandra is hailed as fearless with a powerful and gorgeous voice and continues to be recognized for her passionate performances and vocal versatility as a rising star on the operatic stage. Alex has performed with many amazing theaters, festivals, and orchestras, including San Francisco Opera, Canadian Opera Company, Palm Beach Opera, Pittsburgh Opera, Minnesota Opera, Austin Opera, New Orleans Opera, Wolf Trap Opera, Central City Opera, Arizona Opera, Tulsa Opera, Dayton Opera, Chicago Opera Theater, Sacramento Philharmonic, and Santa Fe Symphony, plus many more. We just didn't have time to put that in here.
Oh my gosh.
The word opera.
I know, it really does.
As a dramatic soprano, Alex's repertoire features such title roles as Turandot, Strauss's Elektra, Tosca, Madame Butterfly, and Daniel Catan's Florencia en el Amazonas. Other major roles include Leonora in Il Trovatore, Lady Macbeth in Verdi's Whoops, the Scottish play, Foreign Princess in Russalka, and Donna Anna in Don Giovanni. And on the concert stage, Verdi's Requiem and Beethoven's Ninth. Light and easy, right? Of course, this list is just a few of her signatures. Alex's apprenticeships include Santa Fe Opera, Pittsburgh Opera, and Central City Opera. She recently represented the United States as a quarterfinalist in the Francisco Viñas International Singing Contest in Barcelona and was a winner of the Metropolitan National Council District Auditions. Alex was also recently awarded a place in the Greek America Foundation's 40 Under 40 class of 2018, which celebrates the professional excellence and philanthropic endeavors of North Americans of Greek descent. Thank you so much for being here, Alex. That's amazing.
It's really weird to read your bio while you're listening. Thank you, though.
Part of the fun. Next, I'd like to introduce Annie Rosen. And let me just read this quote. Annie Rosen will crush your soul. Yep, that's what it's about, folks. Annie describes herself as a mezzo-soprano with some suspicion-y tendencies, particularly in 19th century French repertoire, and a solid lower extension. Non-standard repertoire is her jam, but she likes to keep the ratio of normal to weird about 50-50. One should use one's judgment. She has performed on some of the world's most prestigious stages and with some of the greatest orchestras, such as the Metropolitan Opera, Lyric Opera of Chicago, Deutsche Opera Berlin, Teatro Regio di Torino, Carnegie Hall, Central City Opera, Utah Opera, Calgary Opera, Wolf Trap Opera, Chicago Symphony Orchestra, Lyric Opera of Kansas City, and the Hong Kong Ballet, to name a few. Her roles span operatic pillars such as Adalgisa in Norma, Suzuki in Madame Butterfly, Stefano in Romeo et Juliet, Belgunde in Das Rheingold, and 𝐲𝐵 in Faust, to lesser performed and contemporary works such as Debussy's Melisande, 𝐚𝐜𝐜𝐴-𝐵 in Akhnaten, which is also her Met debut role live and HD, and Edith Thibault in Bel Canto, in which she created the role in the world premiere, which aired on PBS's Great Performance series. Very cool. Annie was a semi-finalist in the 2012 Metropolitan Opera National Council auditions. She holds awards from the Gerda Listner Foundation, the Santa Fe Opera, and Central City Opera. She is also a graduate of the Lyric Opera of Chicago's Ryan Center. Wow. Guys, is the interview over? I don't know. That's awesome.
Super weird. On one hand, it's like, yeah, I did all those things and they were really fun and cool. And on the other hand, it's like, oh.
It's amazing. And it's so great to like read your accomplishments one after another. It's like, wow, you guys are such accomplished women. I'm so proud to have you here on the show.
Thank you for having us. My gosh.
So I'd like to just dive right in, and I'd kind of starting out these interviews with a really hot topic, and that's breath. It's kind of foundational for us as singers and for us as just human beings, because, you know, without breath, we don't live. So I'd love...
True.
Yes, very true. So I'd love to start by getting your viewpoints on breathing for singing and how foundational that is for both of you to your vocal techniques.
Who wants to start? You start your span. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I forgot. in order of the voice type. So I think of breath basically as like the easier the breath, the better, I think. So I try to think, and I also find that it's very repertoire specific, actually, for me. I tend to have a slightly different intake of breath and slightly different expansion, depending on what I'm singing. So I tend to feel that when I'm singing something like Elektra or Wagner or Turandot or things that are a little more powerhousey, I think of breath as being very low, and like lower, like imagery low. So like in my feet, like thinking super grounded and activating my lower back and keeping my ribs expanded, and also engaging my pelvic floor. And kind of all of that sort of plays into this sort of very rooted, grounded, I'm taking the power of the earth type of breath. And those inhales also, depending on the phrase, of course, but you know, for the big, long, sustained singing, a lot of the times they tend to be a little bit fuller and more expanded. But then when I'm doing something like Verdi or Bel Canto or Handel or Mozart, those breaths tend to feel a little bit quicker. And I hesitate to say it this way because I'm sure a lot of you are going to do what I'm about to say, but gaspy. Silent gaspy, trying to keep it quiet gaspy. And they're still low, but they're not quite as rooted. I find, and I think about, I always think about flexibility in breath, but in particular, in the lighter Verdi, I mean, that's not exactly lighter, but you know, it has some color to it, but it feels lighter, in kind of the more flexible repertoire. So I guess that's it feels, while I'm talking about it, it feels way more complicated than I actually mean it to sound. But in general, I would say that I try to think of ease just in different places. How about that?
That's great. Would you mind doing a quick demonstration of the silent gaspy breath? What that's
sure.
kind of like? Yeah.
Try to make sure you don't see my pajama pants. Quarantine.
Love it.
So let's see. That much.
Ah, nice. Okay. And what would the breath to your toes look like?
That one I would have to like stand to fully give you an effect, but
Okay.
I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to do it choir seated position. So
yeah.
like that.
Wow. Thank you for that demonstration. That's awesome.
Sure.
Awesome. Okay, Annie. So tell me, how are your thoughts different?
I think they are a little bit, just because the nature of the repertoire that I do is different. I think of breath more similarly to you. I realize when I'm doing roles that are more like this lovely vanished woman's. Like, for instance, when I am singing an Adalgisa or something that requires a lot of vocal power and stamina, relatively speaking, then I do really have to focus on grounding myself. But usually when I'm doing compromario roles or even contemporary roles whose vocalism is very different from a bel canto style, I find that the less I focus on breath, the better my singing usually becomes. And that in a large part is because I've worked on breathing enough in order to be able to sort of automate it by this point, in roles like that. I was lucky enough to get to work with an awesome breath coach named Deb Birnbaum in New York. And she was actually someone who talked to me about the way different body types need to conceive of breath differently, or it can be helpful if we do. So I had been thinking of breath a lot from my ribs, but my rib cage is like not huge for a singer. I'm more sort of like hip focused. So it helps me if I like if my center of gravity is a little bit lower, because I know a lot of people get a lot of power from thinking of, you know, like sternum up. And I'm not saying I don't need that, because I totally do and could stand to have more of it in everyday life as well. But what usually helps me is thinking of grounding myself in my pelvic floor and just kind of letting everything like below my rib cage release, and then like allowing air to feel as if it is going down to there, even though of course it is in fact in my lungs.
Wow. Okay. So when you were learning this, what kind of exercises did you do? Curious.
A lot of like physical grounding stuff for me. Everyone has different needs, but Deb had me spend a lot of time like on an exercise ball, like bouncing up and down, like to just like open up my hips and keep my feet grounded, but also stay flexible and not let the breath kind of get stuck or let my body get stuck. Lying on the floor also does that while breathing. And, you know, you can put your hand sort of on your lower abs, a little below your navel or above. I mean, you feel different things wherever you put your hands. Anything to basically shake my body out of its routine, which when I am nervous and, you know, just sometimes in general is like, which is not great for breathing. That's not great. So something that will just kind of distract my mind from focusing on anything other than, oh, this is interesting, I'm on the floor.
That's awesome.
Can I jump on that for a second?
Yeah.
I do feel like all of these, you know, talking about how we think about breath always comes with caveats, because it really does depend also on like the position you're in on stage and how nervous you are that day. And if you've, you know, like sometimes I also get into like bad habits with breathing where I'll start over breathing. And one of my favorite coaches of all time, Jeremy Frank, gave me this breath exercise 10 years ago that I still use with my own students and with myself all the time, which is when you take in your inhale, blow out half your breath and sing the phrase. And then you can totally see how much breath you actually need. And then for me, it goes one step further and then also shows me like what kind of breath I need. So
that is so cool.
Yeah.
I want to try that.
It's a great exercise. Yeah.
I was just trying that in my head when you were saying that. I'm like, that's really cool. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. So let's jump into registration, vocal registration. I suspect you both have slightly different thoughts on that, given your voice types. But how do you feel the head voice, the chest voice? Do you think about things like that? Do you think about maybe the falsetto whistle register? How does that all play into your singing?
I mean, I think you should talk about the falsetto whistle register, because she has a freaky
Let me see if I can do
whistle register. It's my personal theremin.
That's like one of the weirdest party tricks. I don't know how I do it, but I've been able to do it. Yeah, like some people can do it and some people can't. My teacher, all of our mutual teacher and your teacher, Bridget Harris, said that it's more common for mezzos to be able to do it, just as often baritones have an easier time accessing the countertenor register. I don't totally know what that is, but he sometimes has me like vocalize with it to strengthen like, you know, its octave equivalence in my voice.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that weirdness, I think about registration basically all the time. Like over the past few years, it's probably the main thing that I have spent time thinking about, because I really ended up having to build my chest voice. It's not something that came naturally to me after I started singing, because when I first started singing, I couldn't vocalize above like an E, what is it, an E3, an E4? I don't remember, whichever one is the top space of the treble clef staff.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Oh my God, no.
That's,
yeah.
wow.
Like, so I started off like that was where I sat naturally, and then as I learned how to sing higher, and that became easier and easier for me, that kind of became where the focus was. But then after that, I had to compensate and like rebuild the low, also because of course the top hit a wall, because when you don't have low, your top hits a wall. So right. Yeah, I worked really very methodically on building a chest voice basically from scratch. When I, you know, in my later years of graduate school and after that. And once that started to come in, I mean, it felt very strange and was like pretty bad for a while. And even when it was good, I couldn't access it readily. So it was just a matter of like practice and practice and practice and working on it and like trying different mixes and different balances and different sensations. And I still do that even now that my chest voice is more accessible to me, especially in the lower passaggio. That feels like always, I just always feel as if I have to be making decisions about what the balance of the mix is going to be like, and how do I get there, and how do I use enough of it without pushing. That's a big one for me right now. And it also changes as I age, just how much, you know, strength and color there is down there, even when I'm able to access it in a helpful way.
Yeah. So
when I just kind of go for it.
Like, you just go ahead.
Yeah, which is like the most mezzo thing ever to say. But I also think because we have fewer higher notes, I don't usually have to think about them as much, because they're just always climactic, because that's how people write for the mezzo voice.
Right.
Like, it's like a little bit different in Adalgisa, because there are like up to 5 Cs that you can sing depending on transpositions. So like the first time I sang through it, I just gave, you know, total, forgive me, balls to the wall for the first one, as I normally do. And then I had something left, and I was like, oh, okay, that's why sopranos stress out about this, because they have a lot of to do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so on this.
Yeah.
Defend
Go ahead. Jump
I
on that train.
Yes, I agree. So because, I mean, I think we might talk about this later, but I do feel that for me, I've learned a lot about my instrument because of how many Fox I've sung. I started high and just kept working my way down. A lot like our teacher's wife, Brenda Harris, who basically did the same thing. I kind of followed the Brenda Harris path. And I started in higher coloratura stuff when I was younger, and then moved through all the Fox, and really didn't settle into this repertoire until fairly recently, my past 2-3 years. And so I feel like that has sort of influenced my technique in a major way, because I found like I was searching for a home for many years. And in that, my voice was never fully put together until I found my repertoire home, which is more in Verdi and things like that. And Verdi was kind of the first door that I feel like taught me truly about registration. I was always focused on my top, and people always said I had no middle, and which is funny now, because most people now think that I started as a mezzo. And so I used to register everything super high. So I would feel like there wasn't much in the middle, and I didn't really know what a chest voice was either. So I didn't start to discover that until I really was like at the end of grad school, and then started working with Braden. And now I think about registration all the time, because I feel like my repertoire is so long and specialized that I have to kind of re-register for each role that I do. So Verdi is in a different position than Puccini, and then Turandot is in a different position than other Puccini, and Elektra is kind of its own thing. So I think about approaches in the top all the time, and they're vastly different from opera to opera. And then also within the opera, there are also moments that are vastly different from each other. So I kind of think I said this to somebody the other day, like I kind of create a roadmap for each role that I do. And if I hit this one point registered this way, then I know that this will happen later on. And then if I don't hit it this way, then I have like 3 contingency plans for if it's not going the right way. So like, I always feel like if I'm singing a role, like there will be, if I have a minute of downtime on stage, I'll be like, okay, check. And I kind of reassess where I am in my roadmap. So that really affects sort of how I register things. And I can expand on that if you want me to, but.
Yeah, I'm curious. So just for some people that may be listening and might not be super clear on what you mean by that, when you talk about re-registering or running into, you know, you've got your plan and then the plan goes off, what exactly is going on? Is it usually a ratio of chest to head that's off, or what are you thinking when you say that?
It's sort of like, for me, yeah, it's kind of a combination of like sensation. The sensation for me informs how much chest or head I have in something, I guess. So I really rely on feel, and I rely on, honestly, like the bad sounds in my head, like, because if it sounds good to me, then I feel like it must sound bad to everybody else. And I found that the sensations that work the best usually sound the worst to me. So that is really interesting. I don't know. It's a very interesting kind of paradox for oneself, I guess. Because the worse I feel like I'm singing in my head, the better I know I'm singing to everyone else.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah. And particularly in the top. And so, like, for example, when I'm singing, trying to think of an example, like Verdi. So I was just working on Aida the other day, and all of those really floaty high notes to me feel super, super low in my neck. So if they're feeling super low and they sound like they're straight and kind of going in my head, then I know they're right. If they don't, if they sound full, or if they feel like they're really vibrating, then I know that they're wrong, because that's a high note more that I would rather have for like a Turandot or an Elektra or something like that. So because that high note to me, I know is more of like a powerhouse, like big high note moment. And so it's just sort of, it feels like there's a little bit more space. It feels like it's positioned slightly differently in my neck. And then for floaty things, then I want them to feel like as low as humanly possible and very straight. And then for like thinking about in like chest stuff, when I was singing Elektra was probably when I carried my chest voice the highest, but it was still, I never went fully into chest. I never go fully into chest ever. I always have at least 15% of head in my mix.
Really?
Maybe that's
why it works so well.
That's probably like, I find that the transition for me, because I actually have a fairly clunky transition, so I always have to make sure that I have some head in it. Otherwise it just clunks away. So, so I'd say that the highest ratio of chest to head happened the most in Elektra because of the way it's written, and because it helped ground me in the bottom and the middle in that role, because I could just pop up to high notes. And then in something like, even like Lady Macbeth, or even like Trovatore, or like those are a little bit more seamless through the registers. So those chest notes probably have more of like a 50-50 registration. So, and then that also influences my middle, because my middle is kind of plummy and a little bit, it always kind of had like a husky quality to it, even when it's totally focused. So I think about how the chest influences that as well to create that seamless transition, because I don't have kind of like a razor sharp middle like other people do. So that's why I always feel like if I go solidly into like a chest belt, it would sound really, really the way the rest of my voice works. And I also think about, for my middle voice, the ratio of breathiness to non-breathiness. So I tend to when my middle voice is really working, it tends to feel very breathy to me. And I tend to sing it with a little bit of breathiness, because then I know I'm not pressing on it. And because of the nature, I think, of the richness and the color that I have, it's very easy for me to press. So I have to guard against that. So I hope that answers your question.
No, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. What would happen if you pressed for a long period of time in the middle? What kind of things?
Did that actually a few months ago, and it felt so much. The problem was that it felt really fun, and I kind of was like, "Yay, this is great!" And then after the first act, I was like, "Oh crap!"
That glorious moment we've all had.
Yeah. And then basically it was like, the top still worked, but it was unfocused fuzz. And I was like, well, I pushed too hard, and now I've swollen my cords, and now I've got to give them a rest. And so that's what I did. And then it was fine. But, but yeah, I would not recommend it, as I found out for myself. So I always kind of feel like I'm walking a tightrope with the stuff that I do. I never fully feel like I can just let everything go. I always am always keeping some in reserve. And when I don't, bad things happen.
And so Annie, when you're singing some of your more contemporary works, do you have to think of registration in a different way? Can you play around with the colors, or do you try to steer away from that?
I definitely think it's important to play around with it, in some ways more so in contemporary. Well, no, that's not a fair thing to say. Equally in contemporary rep than in more traditional stuff. I think it also depends a ton on the rep. Like, I think that the palette of colors that we use in contemporary rep is often, in some ways, wider even than standard rep, just because a lot of composers make use of techniques that are not bel canto technique. And even when they have a technique based in bel canto in mind, it's not like the most traditional bel canto, Like, I find that many composers who write for the operatic voice want like a full and legato sound with a lot of richness, but especially in contemporary American rep, American composers writing for American audiences in English are going to prioritize the text above most other things. And, it varies as to how they choose to accomplish that. But I think that in general, the most important thing in contemporary rep is making sure that the text is clear, which in many ways actually has more in common with American musical theater or other, which is funny, of course, because when you think about it, like all of these things, even bel canto was designed initially to make the text intelligible and to illuminate the text for Italian speakers. But the requirements of understanding English and German and French are all so different that you need to adapt your technique to the language a little bit. And then also, like, sometimes a composer will have you, like, I did a contemporary piece that was basically indie pop, essentially, in style. It was mic'd. It was most below the staff. And I basically just had to, like, work on that for a month, so I didn't sound like, an opera singer singing karaoke in, like, a terrible way. In another recent piece I did, I had to, it's a character who speaks in tongues. So there was a lot of like inhales and gasping and belting. I mean, like, talk about chest voice, but like that, if there weren't that, it wouldn't sound right. It wouldn't be stylistic. So I think I answered your question.
Yeah, no, you did. You really did. That's awesome. And so cool. That role sounds awesome. I'd love to hear it.
It's a super cool opera. Nope, cut that part.
Well, that sounds awesome. So I'd like to now we're going to segue a little bit from registration and laser in onto the passaggio points. Okay, so I'd love to get your ideas on how you navigate both the lower and the upper passaggio, and like on specifics. Do you use vowels? Do you use shaping of the vocal tract? Is it a combination? What are your thoughts? What's your process?
Again, I'm sorry to say, so much of it is repertoire specific for me, but I do use a lot. It's mostly vowels. recently I've started thinking more about like the vocal, like, I don't know, it's funny because I find these things to be very, in myself anyway, very incremental. So once I've gotten understanding of one thing, then like this whole other thing opens up that I feel like I have to kind of dig into. So for example, I just recently, like within the past 6 months probably, have started thinking about what it means to sing fully with like just thinking of an open tube from top to bottom and not thinking about vowel shifts or like any other thing in like exercises. And I had never really, I'm gonna sneeze, hold on.
Isn't it?
Bless you.
It sounds silly because like obviously we want to have an open mechanism when we're going up and down, but I had never really thought about like, what if I just don't move anything? What if I don't change anything? What does that do? Can I do that? And for a long time I couldn't, but now I can. And so now I feel like I have this other tool now of going through the passaggio in certain instances, because it doesn't always work that way for me. So I guess like if a lot of the times I think of, I would say the thing that I think of the most going through the passaggio, like vowel wise, are ers and OE, like whenever I go through the passaggio, F sharp in particular is my that like position. I don't know why, it just works for me. And of course, like I'm not singing like up there, like it's a modified version of that. But yeah, it provides like the easiest passageway into the top. And then on the bottom, I find that again, because of like different repertoire, like my lower passaggio feels like it moves. I don't know if it actually does, but it feels like it does. Because certain roles, like I just did Florencia in the fall, and right after having done Elektra, where I was singing in a fuller chest mix throughout the lower passaggio, and then going to a role that sat significantly higher and actually didn't dip below the staff at all, after having done a role that sat, you know, in certain places below the staff. So it was interesting to kind of play around with this idea that I couldn't dip in to anything close to a full chest mix. So like trying to find that balance when and where like I was skirting just a different part of my lower range, then kind of felt like the passaggio had moved because it just didn't below a certain point. So I don't know if that's total hooey, but that's how it feels in my throat. So there we are.
That's so. Do you think of it when you talk about this or do you think of a tongue position or do you just think vowel?
I just think vowel.
Okay.
For myself, it's funny because I notice tongue position in my students, and sometimes I can get there with them with vowel, but sometimes I can't because a lot of the times the vocabulary is new for them, so I do have to talk more about tongue position. But so I think teaching actually has sort of made me think a little bit more about tongue position than I have in the past. But I also know for myself that when I used to think that way, I would tie myself up in knots. So the vowel positions work better for me because then everything falls into place. So it's only recently that I guess I started even just like pondering on it for myself. But it is not something I think about actively, no.
Okay. Cool. So Annie, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on registration? I mean, pardon me, the passaggio in terms
I mean, it's also
they're so related. Yes, of course.
Pretty similar to Alex's. Again, you know, we study with the same person, and aside from that, even I feel like our voices, there's a way in which they function similarly.
Yeah.
I also get a lot of mileage out of in the upper passaggio or in the like, you know, E, F sharp passaggio. I get a lot of mileage out of and like any a vowel that is narrow and round, which I'm sure affects, you know, my mouth position and resonance and other things that I honestly prefer not to think about consciously.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I never think about my tongue. I just feel like, I don't know, maybe I would be a better singer if I did, but I honestly just feel like I don't have time. Like, so many other things I'm thinking about. Sorry. It's true though.
No, it's a really good point. Yeah.
Like I had a teacher really, really early on, and other teachers who corroborated this, who were basically like, look, when you're on a stage, you are going to have to multitask in the most major possible way. You're going to think about so many things at once that in terms of your technique, the fewer things you think about, the better off you will be. So basically the less I think about my own anatomy and the more I just focus on vowel, breath, release, then that frees up space for text, acting, conductor, don't trip, like,
don't rip your costume.
Don't rip your costume.
Yeah.
Never had that happen.
Lower passaggio wise, I mean, it does connect to everything I was saying about registration. It's still something that I'm very actively working on. And it changes a lot for me. I feel like every time I figure out a transition and a registration that works, either I change rep or time passes and it changes, and I have to kind of retweak it and rework it in very kind of little nitpicky, but ways that have a big impact regardless. So it's basically just ever changing. I think a little bit less about vowels in the lower passaggio, even though I probably, again, should think more about them, and it more is a conscious kind of balance of mixing registers is what that is.
Okay, so you're kind of tuning formants as you go down there rather than thinking, I'm going to sing this vowel like you do in the upper passaggio. Is that correct?
Usually that is correct, yes.
Okay.
I would agree with that too.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, actually.
Yeah.
Describe it.
Yeah. That's it. So now let's take a little turn and let's talk about high notes. I know we've talked about them a little bit. Okay, Annie, I want to start with you because I love this that you say the mezzos, they usually have like their one big high note and it's just loud and you just got to go for it. But I would imagine that's also a lot of pressure because you've got one chance to like show your stuff. So what are your thoughts? How do you approach high notes? I want you to get a little bit more into Adalgisa as well and how you optimize your voice for those high notes because it is quite a high roll, and also what you think of when you just go for it in the shorter rolls that you just have one or two.
Sure. So this is a kind of annoying thing to say and advance apologies, but once I learned how to make them come out, high notes were never an area of big concern for me for the most part. I know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Look, your flow is easier and better than mine is. It's the way it is, you have this beautiful rich middle and low and your chest voice carries for days and I'm like, yeah.
It's so funny though, right? Because
it's ridiculous.
Everybody's always like, well, you're the soprano, so the high notes must just be like blah, and she's the mezzo, so the low notes like blah, and it's so not like that at all.
It has really nothing to do with it. Yeah.
That we're the wrong voice type.
Exactly.
And that's the weirdest thing.
Yes. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah. No, okay.
But Annie, do you remember a time when you said once I kind of learned how to do it, do you remember what it was like to go through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that was like most of how I spent grad school. And undergrad, I feel like I got my G's and A's to emerge. And then grad school was more figuring out B flats, B's, and even C's sometimes. Yeah, some of it was just a matter of doing it a lot. And I think for me, it was a little bit just about having courage ultimately, but some of it also was just about pure physical coordination and lack of fear, because fear was the thing, just like not fear of what would happen for me, but like the extremity of the sensation, because it's just so, I felt like my nose was going to fall off. Like, I felt like I was like gonna like crack a blood vessel just because of the like physical exertion of singing high. To be honest, I don't exactly remember the exercises that gave me those pitches, like especially not what got me kind of, you know, above that, I'm gonna say E4, above that E4. That was a long time ago and I don't really remember. It was a fair amount of just the basic, like the building blocks of an 𝐴𝐵 canto technique, which open that up, which is, you know, how to breathe and how to release and how to support, for lack of a better word, how to give it enough gas without pushing. And that just kind of opened up those possibilities, I think. Yeah, I don't think, some of that also was about vowel, especially going into the extreme top. Like it's kind of a point of contention in myself whether I switch from ah to ah on a B natural or a B flat. Varies, depends on the role, depends on the day. Usually a B natural, but not always. Yeah, once that happens, like I feel like by the time, you know, probably by the end of grad school, I was at a point where in general, I could just open my mouth and a high note would come out. And because I'm not a soprano, there was more, the bar was lower for me. I'm serious. Like it only, you know, it was like relatively, like maybe embarrassingly late in my studies when I was like, wait, it doesn't just matter whether I hit it, it matters whether it sounds it's just, you know, it's different.
It's different requirements.
It's different requirements. And it is true, you know, it's important to make them sound good, especially if you're doing roles with a lot of them in them. In terms of an Adalgisa or something probably like a componist, which I've never sung, but would probably feel similar. I mean, you know, people will like to get on their boxes and say, oh, Adalgisa was written for a soprano, as if that is a statement with meaning.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. Cool story, but you know, also mezzo sing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it depends on what you want.
Depends on the norm too.
It really depends on the norma. So in order to sing a role like that with a lot of climactic high notes, I will say the worst high notes I have ever sung publicly have been in Adalgisa. Like there's one particular C, page 129, I think. I wrote in capital letters, page of death, which probably just set me up for failure, but it was therapeutic at the time. And just the way the approach is, and the worst thing is, it's, unless you add an optional cadenza, which I did one time, it's the first high C that you sing. So that's the one that the audience is gonna be like, oh no, does she have this? A lot of Adalgisas, mezzo Adalgisas will actually not sing it. They'll substitute it with something. There's not an Aussie or anything. It's just like a matter of survival. Yeah, I think I've spent more time and dollars on that page than probably anything I've ever sung. And it ended up coming out, I feel like, probably like 3/4 of the time it worked, which was, I feel like it really worked, like last time I did it. The rest of the C's, for whatever reason, are just easier. But also a matter of, frankly, like not going all out. Like I might have said that before, like not just opening my mouth and which is such a good feeling. It feels so gratifying to yourself, but then for me, I wind up just kind of burning all of my stamina and I don't have enough to get through the rest. So with a role like that, I have to use a lighter touch in general. Like I just have to kind of let it float along and not gun it the way that you really want to, especially when you're getting into it emotionally, which you do with Adalgisa. Basically it's just a matter of, like you said before, giving kind of 80% rather than 100%. People used to say that to me and I'd be like, why? That doesn't make sense. But I was singing, you know, 𝐚𝐜𝐬𝐬. Like it's just, you can give 100% when you sing 𝐚𝐜𝐬𝐬. When you sing Adalgisa, you'll be out of percentages.
Do you think of how do you think about support on the high notes?
I just
in, out,
low in my body. I kind of try to let it make its own decision. I don't I don't fight usually what my body is doing. I try to release, and then usually my abs kind of engage just because they have to. Like if I practice a roll like that, I feel as if I'm doing crunches, just because of like what my body ends up doing.
Okay.
But I don't consciously think about like, okay, now pull it in, or okay, now push it out. And I think that also varies a lot by role. I find I have to use different physical engagement, or I expect different physical engagement in roles that are, for lack of a better word, bigger, with bigger singing, and roles that are sort of lighter and more agile and maybe sit a bit higher, or maybe don't because, you know, high notes are lifting weights. Then I end up using less of my body in that way and focus more on just keeping the entire thing released. Release is a big thing for me. I'm very tense.
Yeah. So you keep saying release, and I'm curious, what is release to you? Where does it happen?
In my muscles, all over my body. Like
all over.
Yeah. If you just, I mean, if I think like, again, this is about trying to pare down the thought to as few words as possible so that it doesn't take up space when I'm on stage. So I'm not trying to watch the conductor and not trip on my dress and not thinking, okay, now I need to use this rib to do this thing, and now make sure I'm doing with this muscle of my tongue. Like if I just say, release your shoulders, like that's enough, you know, because then your shoulders release. I'm sure there are probably ways to practice doing that. You know, any kind of stretching or yoga, or just like any kind of body awareness. But I think about releasing around my stomach and my pelvic floor. And I think about releasing my neck and shoulders, because those are the areas of greatest tension for me. And usually it's just like, it can even just be like, drop it, because you get up and up and up in your breath and in your body. And usually before I go for a high note, and I've been singing for like pages and pages, I just have to be like, okay, drop it. Let all of that go. Like, take a breath if you have time, and then go. And the more I practice that in slow motion, the easier it is for me to engage it on stage under pressure.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yes.
Totally. Totally. That was great description. So Alex, what about you?
Oh, high notes. Boy, I had so many thoughts while you were talking, Annie.
Sorry.
No, it's good. I'm trying to remember. I had one specific thing I wanted to say, and now I'm trying to remember what it was. May have been about release, come to think of it. I feel like the release thing is interesting because I think of it kind of twofold. So I definitely, there are certain high notes. The one that keeps coming to mind is at the end of the second act of Turandot. It's the first act to me.
Obviously, that's the first act.
Is after this really, you know, Turandot is this role that is probably 17 minutes of singing, but it's like murderous because of where it lies. And so the end of having sung 𝐚𝐜𝐿𝐼𝐻𝐿𝐼, then the riddle scene, then this really slow aria that's very then there's these two giant high Cs with the chorus. And usually you're like, you've fallen to the ground, or you've run down the stage and fallen to the ground, and there's some giant physical motion that has happened, and you're wearing like 60 pounds of kimono and like all these like crowns and whatnot. So there's just kind of all this other stuff surrounding these like two high notes that have to happen. Is that the na 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 na? Yeah. Yeah. And Puccini puts two back to back, so it's like do 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 do, and of course, like, you know, depending on your conductor, sometimes they'll want you to hold the first one longer or the second one longer, and they'll take it off of you. So it's like everybody's like waiting for you. And anyway, that's that point. But that one in particular, when I think of release, so I was always afraid to breathe in places that didn't make sense, like textually. And it wasn't until I started singing bigger repertoire that I was like, oh yeah, I can totally breathe in places that don't make sense. And particularly, and then finding the places in these roles where you're hidden to do all of the stuff you need to do. like, so for this one, like I'll always sing mi vuole so that I have a chance to like sort of just go, bleh, okay, go for it. And so that one I actually feel like I can like fully release, but then there are other ones where I feel like it's kind of like a taut release. So I'm thinking of the end of the Elektra aria, which is again 10 minutes of murderous singing that ends in a high C. And I'm trying to remember what the words are leading up to it now. Okay, so you like have about a split second to prepare for this high C. So the only thing I think about in that moment is like keeping all of that leading up to it. Oh yeah, and you're coming off of like all these G's, like repeated G's and A's over and over. So all I think about is like, okay, keep your body up, like don't release fully, but just kind of let everything release out so that you have, and release your throat down so that I can go so good, and so much of that one in particular is courage. Because as long as I can let everything go and not feel like I have to control it, it comes out brilliantly. And the times that I've controlled it, it comes out terribly. So I think for my stuff in particular, like half of it is release, half of it is also just fearlessness.
Yeah.
Also. And then again, like kind of where it is in the role, how it's approached, what the rest of the role has been like, how many high notes you've sung up to that point, because and also physically like where you are on the stage, in what position, like all of those things really play majorly into, I'll have like a ballpark idea of how I want to do something, but then when I get into staging, some of the time it just flies out the window and I have to rethink it. Yeah, and it's like, and a lot of it for me too in the upper high notes is vowel position, and different vowel colors and different positions in the neck make different color choices also in notes. So I'm constantly thinking about how to color a specific high notes and like how I want them, what's the impact I'm trying to make with this high note, and is it the climactic high note, is it not the climactic high note, how many more high notes do I have in the roll, like it's, yeah, I think a lot about them.
What are your favorite vowels to sing on super high notes?
That's what I was trying to think of.
Yeah.
So again, it sort of depends on where it lies, but I would say that and
that's a good one.
It's kind of like Braden does it better than I can, but it's like it's for that one, that's more extreme top or like floaty top note. It sort of feels like I'll be like practicing a warm up and I'll go so that I feel this really tiny place that's super low in my neck, so then I can just go and like put a little high note there, and then I can float for days. And I don't know why the hell it works, but it totally works.
That is wild.
It's very bizarre. Yeah, it's very bizarre, because you would think that like making that sound feels like it's very constricting, but actually it's kind of just like, to me, it feels like a little pinprick where I can be like, go there. And then if I can do and then put the high note exactly where I felt that, then it's like smooth sailing for days.
Wow. That almost sounds like it's a little bit of a whistle register attachment at the beginning to onset.
Explaining that better than I did. Yeah, that's basically what it is. It definitely, I would say it's kind of like accessing that. And I don't think about the whistle register a lot because I don't actually have many notes above what I actually perform. Probably on a good day, I have one or two. So, you know, I don't perform anything now beyond a D flat anymore. And I can usually kind of like squeak out a D on staccato exercises occasionally in E flat, but rarely now. But I do feel that as I've gotten older, my voice has just settled a half step lower than it used to be. Because I used to sing Constanza and things where there were like repeated Ds all the time, but I also had to cut off a big portion of the rest of my voice to do it. So, so I feel like now that my voice is a little more homogenous, in production and in color, I just can't access those things the way I used to, but I kind of think it's for the best because it's better produced.
How was that transition for you? I'm curious.
It was weird because I felt like I've always been, I think so much of singing is also built around your own psyche and how you learn and what kind of a person you are, because I have always been an overanalyzer, a worrier, and a people pleaser. And that played a lot into how I sang, just trying to learn how to sing. So people, I had a fairly easy top that would just kind of come out. So people automatically assume, and I had a lot of power in my top. I was very young. So people were just like, well, you should sing all these high things. And I think that they were right. I'm glad that I started the way I did. And I'm glad that I did. And I also have a natural ability for coloratura. So, so I did a lot of that kind of stuff when I started. And it was, I didn't have to, I had to think about it, but not as hard. So, so then when I started to, so sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So in that, I always felt like I had to make the right sound. I never felt like I could make the wrong sound. If I made the wrong sound, then I was like a bad person. Like I kind of like so I never gave myself the freedom to really explore everything that my voice could really do. And it wasn't, this wasn't on my teachers. This was totally on me. And it wasn't until I started working with Braden that he basically was like, no, we want all sounds. We want ugly sounds. We want squeaky sounds. We want, sounds you would never use, because how else are you going to find what your color palette is? And I never thought of it that way, because I thought singing meant, and again, I am taking full responsibility for this, not on my teachers. I thought singing meant putting it in one position and always using the same position. I never thought of it as like, we're organic bodies and things change. And I knew that my voice would change, but I thought that I would have to sing the same way regardless of how my voice changed, which is not the case at all. So, so the transition for me was actually very jarring and scary. And I felt like for a few years there, like all of my top notes were kind of a mess and my middle was kind of wobbly. And like, I just kind of felt like my voice was doing this. And it was a period of time where, people noticed I wasn't working very much. And and it was good because I had to get this together and kind of then like once this world of opportunity was open to me, and I had, somebody saying to me, like, make the wrong sound in order to find the right one, I made all the wrong sounds. And so once I started to kind of figure out which sounds felt right and sounded the best, for me, then it felt like, okay, like it all started to click, but it did take a while. I mean, it probably took me a good 3-4 years before I really felt like I could settle into kind of a new way of thinking about singing. And now I feel very strongly about going forward in like a really organic way and listening to my body and being just hyper aware of what my body is telling me. And that is, instead of feeling like, well, like they told me that the vowel should feel this way, so it should feel this way. Like, and whenever people say like, put this vowel more forward, or, put a little bit more space in this vowel, I have like, I kind of feel like it runs through a translator in my brain, so that I can like translate that to like, okay, they're saying this, but what they actually want is this. So then I could create that using my own knowledge of my own body now, which is really empowering, actually.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's I think that takes a lot of introspection and probably a lot of time on your part to have gone through that process. It's very brave.
I mean, I'm lucky too, because I am, I'm in a dramatic Fox, so it's, I had the luxury of taking the time. If I was a coloratura, I think it would have been a lot harder. So I'm really glad, and I mean, I do think that, with the size of my voice came the complexity too. So there is that. So I feel lucky in that, there are still roles that I'm not ready to sing. And it gives me a little bit more time to learn, which I don't feel like other voice types have as much of a luxury in that.
Of course. Of course. Wow, that's awesome. So Annie, I want to turn to you and I want to ask you, this is my signature question. What is your desert island vocalese, which prepares you, you can only pick one, to sing anything in a short amount of time?
Cool. Okay. I thought about it. It was a difficult choice, and I think if I literally only warmed up on this, I don't think I would sing as well as if I warmed up on like one. But it would probably be like start low and do like hooray, hoy, hoy, ho. Because what that does, it's like relaxing, so it's chill, so it chills me out, which I need. It like puts me into my body because it starts low and usually in sort of a chestier, mixier place. And then all the hoys and all the stop me from holding tension. I think that's what it does, right? It feels like it stops me from holding tension in my throat so that I can like transition through the arpeggio, like through different registers. And it ends up getting this sort of like crack. And usually when it cracks into the right place. Like it's not an audible crack. It just feels as if it's yeah, so I feel like that just sets up the, again, for lack of a better word, the column in a nice way so that I could like, you know, get everything aligned.
That's awesome. It's really cool. So you can take that high.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's usually like, I don't usually get into my extreme top that way, which is why I think I would want another vocalese on the desert island. But it at least, I feel like it hooks my low and my high together, like hooks my chest to my head. So yeah, like we'll call it the neck exercise.
The neck exercise. Love it.
Neck exercise.
All right, Alex, it's your turn. What's your desert island vocalese?
Well, I did forget to warm up this morning, but this is a warm up. So this is my desert island vocalese. Yeah, I like that one because again, you can do different combos of vowels. You can start in the low and go up, and it also has movement. So so you keep the flexibility. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's a good one. It's a good one. And why do you use pre?
It honestly, like, it depends on the moment in the day. I like right now, like a lot of the time I'll use pro, but like when I started just now, I was like, nope, that's not going to work. I can just feel that I needed a slightly more closed vowel in order to set up the transition into the slightly more open vowel to go up and down. So, so pre feels like a really nice combo because it's kind of halfway. It's like A plus A.
Yeah.
And then it gives you that, that sort of closed, more focused feeling, but also has the buoyancy of the and like the breathy husky thing I was talking about. So then it's a nice seamless transition into an which of course is slightly more open and then can go all the way up and down.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So Annie, where can we find you on social media, on the interwebs? What's your handles?
Where can you find me?
Where can we find you? We want to know.
Right here.
You can find me in my living room in Chicago.
Yeah, don't come in. You can hang out in the street. We'll wave.
Yeah. Okay. So my handle across social media is 𝑟mezzo, because those are my initials, ARR Mezzo. I have a Twitter that I basically never use. I have better places to find me are Facebook professional page and Instagram. I also have a SoundCloud under 𝑟mezzo, and I have a website. Just Google Annie Rosen Mezzo and all these probably appear.
I love this, 𝑟mezzo. And Alex, where can we find you?
My handles for Instagram and Twitter are Loosh Soprano, which is ALOOSH Soprano. And I also have a Facebook professional page under Alexandra Lucian Soprano, and a LinkedIn, and
oh yeah, LinkedIn.
I don't know. Do I have other things? I think that's
Is that
it.
a thing? Is
And
LinkedIn a thing still? I don't know.
For normal people,
for
this
normal
is what
people,
I've
it
learned
is.
during the pandemic.
Yes.
Yeah, not for singers, but for like every other industry, like you go
Okay.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and then we both have websites, and I am the only Alexandra Lucian in the world that I know of. I do have a cousin who is Alexander Lucian, but he's not an opera singer, so he's like 17. So I think if you Google me and spell my last name correctly, you'll find me.
We'll find you.
Rosen in a blues band. I am not she, but
Are you sure?
But you could.
but I
be
could
real.
be. No,
You could be.
Yeah.
So, are you guys teaching or anything? Can students seek you out? What's going on?
by all means.
Yes, absolutely. I've been teaching. I started my online studio officially a few months ago, and we are going strong. So come
That's
and play.
awesome.
Very fun.
Yes, please, young sopranos, mezzos, call them. Where should they contact you? What's the best means?
Oh, social media or my website is
Okay.
fine. It funnels right to my email. So yeah.
Wonderful.
And I don't have a formal studio, but if you want to talk things, the things that I feel like I can be most helpful with are diction, text, and like script analysis, for lack of a better word. So if you want to talk about like characterization or how to like do text, I'm your girl.
And we do tag team occasionally. So
Yeah.
that's very
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, I bet that's an awesome session.
and she focuses more on interpretation.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, ladies, it has been such a pleasure having you here. I'm so glad you could join me all
Thank
the
you.
way from
Much.
the cold land of America over there. Is it cold where you guys are in Chicago?
Well,
It's starting to warm up.
yeah.
Thunderstorms today.
Yeah. It's just
Okay.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, gray, right.
But thank you so much for giving us this platform.
This
to,
is
like,
really fun.
It's so much fun to just like mouth off about technique. It's
Yeah.
really delightful. Thank you for just putting this out to the world. It's
yeah,
really neat.
absolutely. We appreciate it.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. And thank you guys for coming on, making some time.
Yeah.
It's going to
Totally.
be great. All right. You take care.
You
too.
too.
Bye.
Bye.